Shelley's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, was officially brought to the silver screen with the first feature-length film, Frankenstein, in 1931. This film adaptation is directed by James Whale, and Frankenstein was brought to life by Universal Studios at the height of the Universal Studios monster era. The film begins with the Mad Henry Frankenstein, along with his hunchback assistant Fritz, scavenging graveyards for the body parts to create a man in their lab at Castle Frankenstein. Despite Henry's fiancée Elizabeth, his trusted friend Victor, and his old medical professor, Dr. Waldman, attempts to prevent this experiment, Henry proceeds and brings the monster to life. The monster is obedient and submissive to Henry. However, shortly thereafter, it is revealed that the sight of fire sends the monster into a panicked frenzy. The monster makes his escape from Castle Frankenstein, murders Fritz and Dr. Waldman, strangles Elizabeth in a violent outburst, and accidentally murders a little girl. This enrages nearby villagers, who take up torches and pitchforks as they, accompanied by Henry, search for the monster. The frightened monster barricades himself in a windmill from the angry mob. Henry once more faces his monster, and in response is promptly thrown off the windmill, but survives the ordeal. Using their torches to set the windmill ablaze, the villagers successfully kill the monster, finally accomplishing their goal of bringing justice to the monster's victims. In the scene that will be analyzed, Henry displays hubris driven by madness, outrightly denouncing the value of Dr. Waldman's work and ignoring the pleas of Elizabeth and Victor to stop. Henry explains in detail how he will provide proof of how he can defy the laws of nature through his work. When he cannot persuade the three outsiders to leave his lab, he and Fritz resume the experiment, raising the corpse's platform through an opening in the roof as lightning strikes. The experiment is a success, and the corpse is able to move, prompting Frankenstein to shout, "It's alive!" This scene was chosen due to iconic significance. This movie has spurred a multitude of parodies, sequels, and references over the years, and Henry Frankenstein's "It's Alive" has become a staple within pop culture. Henry Frankenstein's exhibited madness in this scene demonstrates exactly why he is one of the first pioneers in the mad scientist trope and has inspired the creation of such similar characters based on this archetype. This scene is important to the audience as it demonstrates the power of Henry's madness, as well as being the first moment that they are actually introduced to the monster, who becomes the antagonist in the film's climactic finale. The scene illustrates directorial liberties as director James Whale approved several changes that greatly differed from the source material. His liberties in this scene included new characters that never existed in the book through Fritz, Dr. Waldman, and Victor, introduced content alien to the source material and having Frankenstein perform his experiments with others present, despite the book having it be imported that he's secluded from the world and that no one knows about his experiment, and altered core elements to best suit his final product by giving Frankenstein an insane personality rather than the hopelessly obsessed and drained one in the book. The most important change James Whale makes to this scene is demonstrating the reaction of Henry Frankenstein to the outcome of the experiment. As the scene unfolds, Henry expresses a psychotic joy, and overwhelmingly ecstatic to see his work come to fruition. But in the book, this is the opposite. Mary Shelley's Victor Frankenstein was disgusted by his creation and horrified when the realization that he could have possibly created such a monstrosity finally hits him. This change completely alters the nature of the story because each medium embraces a different theme. While the novel describes a man anxiously trying to avoid the consequences of his actions while guilt slowly drives him insane, the film deals with a man dealing with the fatal impact that his hubris has on others. James Whale even alters the setting of the scene to take place in the Bavarian mountains in Castle Frankenstein, whereas the novel has the setting of the experiments taking place at his university in Ingolstadt, Bavaria. James Whale's directorial liberties have also shaped the overall codes and conventions in this scene. The team behind this film carefully selected a cast that suited the vision they wanted to convey. Most of these actors did not have any significant roles prior to the film, and their overall demeanors are indisputably a greater factor in the rationale for cast selection. The film's teams cast a tall and intimidating actor, Boris Karloff for the monster, a woman with soft facial features, May Clark as Elizabeth, and men who could act insane, Colin Clive and Dwight Fry as Henry and Fritz. The director had his characters dressed in clothing to represent their demeanors, such as fur for the delicate Elizabeth and a lab smock for Henry. The monster's design largely relies on special effects makeup that was uncommon in the films of this era and thus solidified the monster's iconic yet haunting presence. The props used all serve a functional purpose to stimulate actual scientific equipment. From a technical perspective, the lighting, angles, and editing transitions the director employs are fairly basic. The lighting used is minimal, with the majority of light coming from sparking equipment and torches. The angles used are primarily looking downwards on Henry and his companions, yet directed upwards at the monster. These angles were chosen to show the distinction of power between the observers and the monster. The editing transitions are simple cuts, however this is to be expected as complex editing was not inherent in films of this era. James Whale's directorial liberties are also demonstrated in the elaborate special effects. James Whale knew that he had to make the scene where Henry reanimates the corpse much more elaborate than Mary Shelley had described in her novel to keep the audience's focus and recognize the potential this scene had. James Whale thus improved the scene by adapting it to a film audience through the use of special effects. By employing the use of special effects in an era that was unfamiliar with such a concept of special effects that are utilized in today's modern movies, the audience's fascination with this scene grows as they were mesmerized by certain effects such as the electric pyrotechnic, fritzes in the monster's specialty makeup, and the sound effects. James Whale even lengthens the process to animate life simply to show the fullest potential of his effects. The simplistic effects that this scene exhibits were considered beyond groundbreaking at the time of its release, and this allows for James Whale to captivate his audience. James Whale therefore uses his directorial liberties to create a visually interesting scene that kept his audience interested at all times.
Quite a good scene, isn't it? One man crazy, three very sane spectators.
There is no music in this scene because there isn't a true soundtrack composed for this movie. James Whale chose to exclude music because he wanted the only background sounds intentionally heard to be that of thunder and equipment in this scene, thus producing an eerie edge that could support his carefully composed visuals. Props to the plasma ball and Tesla coil Jacob's ladder conducted electricity to demonstrate the power of Henry's experiment, adding to the electrifying atmosphere. This use of dark lighting allows for the electricity used to be heightened and increases the film's intensity. Using a bird's eye angle to look down on Henry and his companions, and a worm's eye angle to look at the monster is made to appear larger than those around him, foreshadowing the monster's strength. This scene largely connects to the psychoanalytic theory because it uses many compelling archetypes designed to simulate fear in the viewer. Archetypes such as the mad scientist Henry, outcast Frankenstein's monster, and loyal sidekick Fritz are visible at all times in the scene. These archetypes have been specifically chosen to enhance the abnormal atmosphere in the scene. Henry Frankenstein's shadow is also demonstrated in the scene as it drives Henry to blindly pursue his obsession with reanimated life, despite his loved ones begging him not to. These elements create a dark nature that preys on many viewers' own repressed dark nature, to inspire an unsettled yet curious emotion in the viewer's conscious.
It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.
While it may appear as though James Whale's adaptation of Mary Shelley's work is exhaustive of artistic liberation, it is important to note that Mary Shelley's novel was released in 1818 England, with language and themes that are unfamiliar to American audiences when this film came out in 1931. James Whale had to adapt the novel not only across mediums, but across a literal century's worth of cultural advancements. Whereas Mary Shelley limits physically fearsome elements to focus on psychological terror, James Whale does the opposite. By increasing the physical fear factor of Mary Shelley's work to create a brand new horror, James Whale could distract his audience from the horrors of the Great Depression reality. Even the novel's Victor Frankenstein undergoes a transition to Henry Frankenstein because James Whale believed that the name Victor was too severe for the Great Depression era audience. Every change James Whale made was for the purpose of creating a compelling film for his audience, filled with an exciting storyline and brilliant effects for a viewer to lose themselves in, all while managing to uphold the key features of Mary Shelley's tale. These changes allow the movie to become more than a novel adaptation, to forge its own identity and relevant presence in pop culture. It is therefore that James Whale's directorial liberties have improved this scene for its audience.